Hello and welcome. Today's discussion surrounds the business challenge of understanding what multi-cloud is and how business owners should expect and plan for it. Joining us today is the lovely Miles Ward, Google Cloud Director of Solutions. Miles, thank you so much for joining.
Jason, thank you. I super appreciate the opportunity. This is going to be a lot of fun.
I think so too. I have to start with a fun memory.
All
I
right.
think the first time I met you, you were actually, I want to say it was probably 2000 and, oh my gosh. Well, wow. It
Yeah,
might
no, no, now you're dating yourself.
many
Oh,
years
we're old acquaintances now.
ago. And interestingly enough, the conversation was uh, talking about the concept of lifting and shifting into the cloud. So
Mhm.
the idea of cloud in itself was still very new. And you were talking about, okay, moving up is great. There it is. There's the cloud. I see it. But don't just replicate. And that was kind of one of the first things that I remember before getting to know you personally, that you were really a big advocate of.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the delta in value to most users from lift and shift, which I have heard rephrased as my mess for less, and the alternative to that being move and improve, which I think is a snazzier way of
I like
saying it, uh, and, and recognizing that like what is typically like relatively small changes in the design of the application, your use of managed services, a couple of other components that reduce the complexity for these kinds of tools, they can have really outsized benefits. And we saw a lot of people following kind of standard ITIL modalities where it was, I change one thing at a time or I get canned. And by moving to cloud, I want to change nothing at all. And so we're really trying to like peck at that a little bit and say, no, please don't needlessly pedantically follow that model when it all it will do is prove to you that going slow sucks and that you're going to end up spending a bunch more money and doing a bunch more weird op stuff to accommodate the kind of more structured approach. So that's advice that has definitely stood the test of time. I've seen lots and lots of companies moving to more of that move and improve model, and it helps.
And speaking of move and improve, one of my favorite tweets from you recently was after someone posted a picture of looked like a desktop, and inside of it was a Cobra, and worst support request ever, I suppose. And then a whole bunch of fun snake comments, and then of course you wrote reason number 1,772,465 to move to the cloud: no Cobras.
Yeah, no, a distinct lack of venomous snakes. I have to like that picture was really close to home. I personally, as a kid tech support dork, like opened up this couple's machine who they were very concerned was very broken, and mice had stuffed it full with popcorn. And, and you're looking at it like this is the sort of thing where the original computer bug, the original software bug, is literally an actual insect that landed on the vacuum tube terminals that they ended up identifying and pulling out of the way. Like, truth is stranger than fiction. One of the convenient bits of cloud is the hardware environments are managed to such a totally radically different level of rigor than any of us could reasonably afford in our own environments or even in grouped environments. Right? I mean, I think Google's into $30.9 billion on this stuff in the last 3 years. I don't know anybody spending the billions of dollars on making sure they've got their little local gear set up right. So it's fun to be able to take advantage of that outsized investment.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think that I love that. I love the image of the Cobra just being such a good representation of what organizations were dealing with for years and years and years. The Cobra is, there's so many different specific costs and pains of managing that stuff on your own versus to what your point was, of just like leverage these gigantic amounts of monies that are available to really make sure that your stuff is so taken care of in such a level that you could never even fathom.
Yeah, we help a lot of companies that are, I think everybody kind of arrives on their own, business planning process and their budgeting process, and they have all of the sort of vagaries of the way their business works. All of these things end up in funky, sunken, shared costs. I've worked with a bunch of universities who are like, well, I don't ever account for the electricity cost or the building cost. Those things are free to me. And I go, well, then they're not actually free. They're just free on your budget line. Like,
Right.
you want to go bring in the other folks that are paying this exorbitant power bill that you seem to rack up. Like, I'm sure they have a vested interest in the outcome of this conversation. So there's a lot of places where when we get in with big enterprises, we realize just how deep the problems around attribution of cost, around getting to a clear bill within the sort of yearly budget cycles. I've talked to plenty of customers who say, wait a minute, your cloud comes with a bill once a month. I'm like, yes, a bill once a month. They go, I'll buy it just so I get a bill. That sounds awesome. So there's a lot of places where I think cloud, and as much as we can get a bad rap, like, oh, you make it hard for businesses, oh, it's very difficult to use cloud. Like, there are some things that make it startlingly compatible with the needs of business in comparison to the like hard, wrought, gnarly procurement, implementation, decommissioning, blah. Like, some of that stuff is really hefty.
Hmm. That's okay. And now here we are after years ago talking about just the idea of the cloud and removing oneself from the work involved and the cost of having on premise. And now the conversation has evolved to multi-cloud. And
Right.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I said that's right. I mean, there's a giant shift from what I see, and I run this team at Google that's in charge of working with the customers that are breaking path, the people that are out at the cutting edge. We're trying to expand the art of the possible in public cloud, and the the demand from major customers to, at a minimum, anticipate that at some point in the future they may want to use more than one, and to have their architectures and their implementations reflect that potential. Up and through, I have plenty of customers that are active in production, running on more than one right now, and earning the benefits thereof. And that's just really different than where we were. I even think 3 or 4 years ago, where all of the conversation about hybrid really centered on my on-prem gear, and then maybe, just maybe, I'll have a little bit of stuff in the public cloud. Now, given public cloud is pretty much a given, and it's more a matter of the timeline and the adoption rate that your business can handle, and how do you get to an accelerated rate of change. Now I think a lot of businesses are recognizing how much dependency and how much reliance they put on these big third parties, and they're just really reticent to make some of the same strategic errors that they have made before around reliance on singleton parties, right? I mean, part of that is about lock-in, part of that is about negotiating power, part of it is about retaining and being able to leverage access to existing technical skills. I hire 10 people that know GCP. I'm going to want them to build on GCP. I don't want to have to retrain them on a bunch of stuff. And you have a lot of places where different providers have different differentiated products. And I don't want to have my menu of options truncated just because I've picked one. So there's a lot of places where businesses are trying to figure out, I want my cake, and I want to eat it, and I want multi-cake, and like figuring out how you work through all that is something my team spends quite a bit of time on.
And something else that you guys spend a lot of time on too is just drawing that line in the sand to clarify, because and just to bring it back to something you said earlier, was I think a lot of organizations get a little confused about the concept of hybrid cloud versus multi-cloud and really what that means. And you guys are really trying to put the stake in the sand and say, look, let's just make it crystal clear what these two things are.
Yeah, yeah. we've been spending a lot of time with companies because I think the kind of dominant messaging right now is that hybrid cloud, and these labels all sort of shift over time.
Yeah.
But what I see in practice is that hybrid cloud means I have an original on-premise footprint, and I am now extending and modernizing that footprint by taking advantage of public cloud components. And most of the concerns around hybrid have to do with the networking and interop, and how do I set up the security and the monitoring and maintenance and management of that, hopefully through some kind of a single pane of glass or other kinds of approaches that simplify the operations of what are, very different environments. The We try to, I've spent a lot of cycles with companies thinking through how to get them to up level that conversation a little bit,
Mm,
where the reality is they are like, there is no single company that can consume all of its technology footprint from a single vendor, right? We are all hybrid all of the time, and there's no, like, I hear a lot, like I'll talk to a CIO and they'll say, I am undertaking a hybrid project, it has a start and an end. And I'm like, you are crazy. You are in hybrid now, and you will be in hybrid forever. And the definition of hybrid will change as you are blending between other new types and models for delivery of value in technology. But that's never going to stop. So, and if anything, the rate of change is accelerating. So
mm,
the frequency with which you have to initiate your hybrid project is only going up. So businesses that I'm talking to are trying to move from like, how do I make the serial one at a time, start to finish, starting point, ending point, future state, like, how do I get that transition cycle? How do I move from that way of working, which is like sort of like waterfall but for whole organization systems and their training and all the rest of that? How do I make that feel like we are resilient and constantly changing, and we recognize that change is the natural state, and we will be in change all the time, and
mm,
making it so that our business processes anticipate continual change, which is sort of the whole enterprise becoming agile technically. And
yeah.
that's, if they thought it was uncomfortable doing it to their dev teams, it's uncomfortable doing it to IT. So there's a lot of support that they need as they start to make that transition. A lot of places where I think there's big value to be earned as they are able to capture the benefits of these somewhat more complicated topologies earlier in their cycle.
Mm.
Hi there, I hope you're enjoying the show. We'd love to get to know you. We help creative companies get work done by delivering a simple, strategic, and human IT experience. If you'd like to talk to one of us, go to ripplit.com/sign me up. We'd love to get to know you more. Thank you, and back to the show.
I think that just the idea of you seeing that the enterprise is adopting agile, like, is in that sense is just it's kind of mind blowing in comparison
Yeah,
to, it was used to be that, no, if you have even a remote idea about some sort of change, we should be talking about this now so that in 15 years from now we'll actually think about doing it. Yeah.
right. Yeah, and I also see, like, lots of businesses, right? I mean, I feel like companies can feel the drumbeat in the background,
Yeah.
right? And the tempo is getting faster. And
Mhm.
so they're trying to figure out, are there things that I can do to stay in line with that acceleration? And there's a bunch of strategies for that, right? Like, companies buy plucky startups in their vertical to try and see what the youngsters are doing in their area. You stand up an innovation team that's going to go try a bunch of crazy experiments. You break out a subgroup within the product to try and take on a new technology platform. Maybe the tech is the thing that's going to enable the faster speed. And each of these, I mean, well trod, dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of companies trying each of those things, are all efforts toward realizing that the kinds of change we're talking about are pretty inevitable,
Mm.
given the value prop on the other side. And
Mhm.
nobody does this stuff because once you sort of switched, it costs a lot more and you're slower. Like,
Yeah.
right? They do have a benefit. So I think it's, especially as we move over to, as many of the businesses that are seen as hugely path breaking and thought leading, and as a result earning big revenues and big market position changes. I saw a recent chart that was talking about how long it takes for a company to get into the Fortune 500, going from 50 years to 20 years in the last 50 years. And you're going like, okay, so there is like a real world structural foundational change in the rate, in
Mm.
the speed overall. So I think you're gonna see businesses really radically increasing the degree to which they do this kind of experimentation, because they got to recognize that they're not moving forward, they're standing still, and standing still equals falling behind. So
Oh, without question. I mean, and also, I mean, just the incumbent staff, like the newbies. I mean, their world is so different than, than the world that you and I were
mm-hmm.
working in beforehand. The knowledge uh, of technology and how to utilize
Mm-hmm.
it, the expectation of how information is going to be delivered to me when I start at a new organization. I mean, it's completely different than it ever has been, which is really
Yeah, I had this CIO relate back to me. He was talking about one of his moves was to always participate in some of the induction meetings for new employees.
cool.
And they had a presenter internally saying, you're going to need to use, Excel to build, uh, you know, uh, to build the projections that you'll present to leadership about what you're doing. And they got like a sea of hands inside the room going, what is Excel? And, and the kind of the trainers kind of eye blinkety, right? And they're like, well, it's like it's a place where you can put numbers and words, and it's kind of like a graph like this, and you can put formulas in there, like, and like a whole bunch of people are like, oh, okay, a Google sheet, fine, okay.
Yeah.
And so that kind of like the distance there of what we expect people coming in are familiar with or capable of, have the sort of onboarding to, in the real world of that, where all of technology for the younger generation is just hugely different.
Mm.
It's a really big
Looks
deal.
like there's a problem.
Look, and now Google's talking to me about stuff. You always got to watch out with examples, and then my
Yeah.
home will start acting up.
Love it.
Mhm.
Cool. So I was reading an article that you wrote back in 2016. It's actually a two-part article, and I'll make sure show notes, everything will be here. The name of both of them, part 1 and 2, was "What if you could run the same everywhere?"
Yeah.
And great stuff, as always. The one part of it that really struck me, just trying to understand from like a business owner's perspective, is just this: there is data, and data is everything. I cannot think of an organization that does not rely on some sort of data point, that this information is sacred to keeping me alive.
Yeah.
And the capacity of it is nonstop growing.
Yep.
And there is a fear, though, that, let's say the organization's 15 years old and there's 15 years of data that's just sitting
Mhm.
there. There's still a very deep fear that it's either going to be way too expensive or almost impossible to even begin the conversation.
Yep. Yeah. I think it's wild to, in comparison with the way that the costs work on your own environment, right? Like I get a lot of customers that talk us through, like, right now, today on Google Cloud, to store a gigabyte of data costs 7/10 of a cent for a month, which doesn't sound expensive. But you start to do multiplication where, like, a terabyte is $7, and you go upwards from that. Like a petabyte is, well, that's like 70 grand. Like that costs a lot. So, or 7 grand. But in any case, that um, they'll go, well, hold on, like I can buy a terabyte hard drive off the rack at Costco for like $100. What do you mean I got to pay? Like that seemed like over the course of a couple of months, like this is going to end up paying for itself. Like, why wouldn't I just run my own hard drives? And those are like there. It's really a good place to start in the conversation with those kinds of customers, because the reality is they are thinking correctly, right? Like, it turns out the gas for your car costs a lot less than the car, right? And the data that goes in is really an important ingredient, but it should cost a lot less than the overall process of management and delivery and extraction of value and application of that data into other services. The counter example to this stuff, an easy one to say, is like, okay, cool, we charge you a little more for the gas. That's true. Now you want to do machine learning on that data. You can go buy hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of GPUs that are 1/30th as fast as the tensor processing units, the custom processors that Google has built for this stuff. So, you tell me, right? Car is $5, but the gas is spendy, or the car is 50 grand and the gas is like a little bit cheaper. Trust me, the $5 car is a good call. Um, and I think that pattern plays out over and over and over and over again. Again, it's not just the like, I need a backup of my stuff someplace, I want to be able to do data analysis on it, but moving into the relational databases and the NoSQL databases and the sort of active stores of state, the operational characteristics of those systems suggest, and this is what we're seeing sort of borne out by the data, that the general rule of thumb is that in an on-premise environment, in an environment where you manage the risks, the frequency of service interruption will be lower than it is in public cloud, because we're changing stuff more frequently. We have a much more complex workload. There are way more updates and changes happening. And the severity of outages on your environment will be much, much worse. It will take you longer to get back online. It will be a much higher likelihood that you will permanently lose data. And so companies are trying to figure out the balance, right? Like, I don't want to go down, but man, if I go down, I really would like to get back up. And I talked with the folks at Sony the day after they were compromised in an attack, right? And it took them a month and a half to get back to email, while their email was available as a downloadable torrent for everyone on the planet, right? So you imagine, like, you've got the CEO saying, I would like to be able to check my email, and I would like it to not be on the web. Thanks, please. Right? Like, that delta, if say, for example, access to Gmail goes down for 30 seconds or something like that, we have hugely vested interest in keeping those systems online. And we have the technology investment to ensure this kind of redundancy and defense and depth in operations. That means these systems, they recover. We get back online way more quickly and with much lower jeopardy to overall customer data. So when I hear companies thinking through, I want to be able to operate in a way that's consistent in both locations, there is a substrate of that has to be maintained. Like, I want you to have it so that the developers have a similar experience in both places and the database people have a similar experience in both places. But if one of those two places has this giant offload of risk, where you push risk and complexity onto the cloud provider and make it their problem, and conveniently they are set up to accept that push. We are super good at handling those kinds of risks and complexities. And so it's the partnership there with our customers to help them as a whole deliver a more effective experience to their downstream customers, whether this is IT serving the needs of the business or product companies that are building the actual front of their business on top of us. In both of those situations, we think the trade-off of risk is one where we're seeing a lot of companies take value from a more public cloud approach, where you're able to take advantage of that. But as you think through the transition of this stuff to being a place where you want to run in multiple clouds, the value benefit of as many of those tools being open as possible is really critical, like super, super critical. If you do all of this work to be able to take advantage of the better risk profiles and the lower cost profile in public cloud, and then all of a sudden you have to redo all of that work to use a different one, you feel like you're locked in. And that, like, escaping the The real technical lock-in, what I would say is like, expensive in like, linear staff time to overcome, and the potentially just as real financial and contractual lock-in. People get into these things for years at a whack. You get all these sort of discount models built on top of that. The companies that I talk to, a big part of what they're trying to achieve in this next generation of technology change is to preserve more power, to be able to choose what they want when they want. And they have been raked over the coals by the previous generations of technology to not have that much power
Mm.
in their negotiations, in their decision making, in their go to market exercises. All the rest of that has just been made more complex. And I think we are just at this sort of tipping point in technology where providers are starting to recognize that giving powerful customers can do powerful things, right? And like all of a sudden, if they can start to do magic and they don't feel like they're so impeded by the contracts that and the systems that we've built, they can get creative and go run and go build incredible stuff, and we benefit from that. So that I think that alignment of goals between the cloud providers and the enterprises, where I think long-term technology ISVs may not be quite so aligned,
Mhm.
sets up for a lot of long-term growth and positive value for both parties.
Mm. I love that. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Um, I'm gonna jump ahead. You started to talk about the openness,
Yeah.
and there um, there was a great article that you and your team put together that I will also share called "Why You Believe in an Open Cloud."
Mhm.
Um, and a, a, a quote that very similar to what you were just kind of touching on is that, the quote is that in addition, this is from a business owner's perspective, you're going to see that in addition, their on-premise environment, most companies will likely adopt multiple public and private clouds in the coming year.
Mhm.
And I think that just to kind of pull everything that you've been talking about together in that sense is folks are already more unaware that they're already getting there. And but it seems like now that when that awakening is happening, they're starting to say, well, then how do I be more granular and specific about doing it that benefits the organization, gives me that more layered security. I sleep better at night knowing that I have this fail safe here.
Yeah, there's what we had talked about before. I mean, I think there are these basic benefits of provider independence
Mm,
that I hear from companies they want.
mm,
So they want freedom from lock-in, they want negotiation and price pressure control. They want to be able to reuse the technical skills of people that arrive at the business as opposed to force everybody to train to the single platform they're good at. And they want access to the very best of technology, no matter which provider is offering it. Everybody has some differentiated magic, and they don't want to cut off their teams from access to magic. So if you're trying to earn those four things, you have uh, there is a technical and a resource and a focus cost to each. So if they're hugely different, right? If the three cloud providers were as different as mainframe and client server and mobile, and you had to make something work across all three, I think most businesses would look at the technical complexity of that and the number of assumptions that they can't make and the degree to which there really isn't a common denominator across the three. And you got to really squint to try and figure out how you'd make something like that work. The cost is too high, and the little benefit that you get in negotiating power, the rest may be totally washed away by the extra cost associated with maintaining that kind of compatibility or interoperability across the rest. What's happening is the technology companies are lowering that bar.
mm,
So for things like compute, object storage, queuing, some of the basic building blocks of almost every modern application, they have become hugely interoperable in comparison to where they were even just a couple of years ago. Some of that is due to the embrace of existing open source software as managed services from the providers, right? Turns out you can rent MySQL without having to do MySQL operations from all three of the public clouds. So if you build an application on top of MySQL, congrats, you can run on any one of the three of them, and you have a relative to the differences between relational databases, a much lower barrier to be able to flip-flop between the two. Same thing has happened on the compute side and the container side as a result of Kubernetes, which allows you to run the same on all three. And the paper that you were talking about before, the run the same anywhere, runs through this whole list, right? TensorFlow means you can run machine learning the same everywhere. Apache Beam means you can run your data flow processing the same everywhere. The stuff that we're doing on top of Kafka with interop with PubSub means you can run your queues the same everywhere. That huge reduction in the technical risk of driving interoperability between competing technology platforms in public cloud means that those benefits are now within reach. Maybe I can get negotiating power without so much technical overhead that it washes away the benefit. So we're hearing all of a sudden, out of nowhere, all sorts of companies saying, ooh, I like that. I want that negotiating power. I do want that advantage. I want to be able to reuse technical skills. I want all the access to the fun toys. We did a great project with the folks at one of the largest banks in the world, and their internal leadership says we're never going to spend less than 10% on any one of the public clouds, and we will never spend more than 50%. It's your job to figure out how to get to 50. And so that is such a hugely different conversation than we're going to run some on SQL Server and some on Oracle DB and some on MySQL just to sort of keep no, the applications are totally different above that. All of the interfaces are totally different. The technical cost of maintaining that kind of interop vastly exceeds the returns that you get. So we think the clearest and easiest way to get to that continual reduction in the technical overhead required to maintain interop across providers is to do the work together in the middle in open source. And that's why we say that we're all about an open cloud, because we think it's what aligns with the needs of most of our customers, where they want to earn those benefits and they don't want it to cost so much to do so. So we are the ones who built Kubernetes, and but we're not the only ones, right? So we built the first version, we put that out there. Version 1.6, which is not the most recent one, but the second to most recent one. We're now on 1.8. 1.6, almost all of the patches came from Microsoft, right? And a whole huge chunk of security stuff in 1.7 came from the people at Red Hat. So there's a real collaboration there, right? It is literally the number 2 open source project behind Linux at this point, which is like mind blowing in terms of the amount of contribution that represents. But we're so far from done. There's so much more stuff that has to get made easier. And so you've got a bunch of engineers at Google, and we hope we're encouraging a bunch of engineers at other places to work together on this vision of a truly open cloud.
I mean, it's the movement is very apparent, and it is so. You can always tell when you start to just you're flipping through multiple different news sources, and the multi-cloud is becoming something that I see at least every 4th or 5th article, depending on where I'm floating around. And I think that with that, there are business owners that are reading it, that are seeing it. There are adventurous ones that are like, let's do this now. This is awesome. And then there's some that are a little hesitant, and they're concerned about the folks that they love, that they have, that have been using the other systems that have been, tried and true. And we were talking a little bit offline beforehand, but you actually see that as an encouragement opportunity. That, don't be afraid of these technologies that you've never heard of before, and probably your colleague may not have either, or has no idea how to operate it.
Yeah, there's a lot of new stuff. We grab people and bring them into Google and onboard them to working just on our tech, and it's 132 products in public cloud now. So just being able to rattle off the list of this stuff, and the perpetual problem of all open source products having goofy, unpronounceable names will probably never stop. But there's a great video with Eric Schmidt who's kind of rattling off. He's like, Kubernetes, I don't know if I'd have gone with that name. You know, BigQuery, that one makes some sense
That
to
would
me.
make sense. Yeah.
That's a pretty good one, right? Big table, big query. I like that. That's pretty clear. So I think there's a lot that um, our systems integrator partners of all three of the clouds are doing a good job to try and help break down what it is that's common and what's different and how these open source tools can help. There's a huge amount, a huge amount of training and onboarding material and webinars and all the rest of that kind of content.
Mm,
And I think the events from each of the major providers are doing a lot to highlight these technologies because they recognize that the degree to which they allow a business to reduce the perceived risk of a more complicated topology like that, it just increases the value overall of the solutions being proposed. So there's a lot, I think, that's going on as well, where companies, if there's the sort of internal trend of this move toward multi-cloud and a move toward open systems and a move toward interoperability, I think that sits inside of a much bigger over trend, which is people do not want to have to manage the crap.
yeah.
And there are a bunch of downstream, you know, in incarnations of that. So, software as a service being kind of the most obvious. It's really easy to not have to manage stuff if you completely pay someone else to manage it for you. And I think there's a lot of places where the SaaS providers, especially, are recognizing, ooh, it would be nice if I have a customer that has a bunch of data in one of the clouds. I want my SaaS to live next to that data, or their other application systems or their other components. So I'm going to want to run my SaaS on more than one, just for proximity and secure access and all the sort of structure that's beneficial as a result of being right next door in the same data centers. You also have people that are building workloads that work that way, right? So we've got a bunch of, ad bidders and ad retargeters that go, wait a minute, I can rent from Google Cloud and be on the same machines where the ad bidding happens? Like, this is a great setup. Let's completely do that. So the uh, the the work of onboarding and training and education will continue, but I think the biggest bit is, irrespective of the competitive benefits, the places where I think you're going to want to play these providers off each other. By and large, the open source software recommend architectures and application designs that are just healthier. It's faster to develop software these ways. It ends up being better from an availability standpoint. They tend to cost less. Like, even if you don't run multi-cloud, running in a way that anticipates multi-cloud by way of using open stuff probably delivers a bunch of benefits too, right? Like, without, so it's the the medicine is good whether you take it or not.
You're right.
Right.
Oh, Miles, thank you very much for your time on this. I'm
No problem.
really looking forward to just listening to it again and getting the show notes together, because it's just, this was a lot of information that was just phenomenal. But before we head out, I do want to just ask, you know, if there's anything in particular that is funky or fun that you're working on that you'd love to talk about. I'd love to hear it.
Sure. I think it's really easy to have the conversation that we're having about, and to bound that conversation in infrastructure, right? What are you doing to make hybrid and make open the work around my computers and my databases and my backups and all the rest of that stuff? We're watching more and more businesses trying to take and earn these same benefits and think about the problem the same way as you move up into their data analysis and machine learning environments. And conveniently, a bunch of that software and technology is newer. And since it's newer, it tended to be built in the open, and it tended to be built in a way anticipating these kinds of setups. Like an easy example, of one of the places where we have a lot of businesses that are trying to figure out how to run in a hybrid with Google Cloud in order to get some of the differentiated magic. We built this whole thing called AutoML, where instead of having to write your own TensorFlow model code, which is like 100 times easier than it used to be to write machine learning. Like it used to be like C and PhD computer science, and I'm super good at applied mathematics. Now with TensorFlow, it's like Python, and we teach high school kids, but some of the technology executives aren't quite as good as high school kids. So AutoML takes you up a step, and you go like for pictures, you take a bunch of pictures of a thing, you say that they're all pictures of a given thing, you upload them, and then voila, AutoML will be able to correctly identify that. We've been doing demos where like literally same day, we grab a bunch of food from a given neighborhood, take a bunch of pictures of it, build a model while people watch, run the model live. Now, now you can tell the difference between, this company's chili and that company's chili. Or I did it with the dolls from the Avengers, right? So if I hold up a green doll in front of people, it just says sort of green or monster, but this thing goes, that's the Incredible Hulk, that's Black Widow, that's Iron Man. So being able to turn machine learning into something that's easy enough to do live in front of customers without any code is pretty magical. And the number of use cases is staggering, right? Like I get made fun of by my boss. He's like, why don't you have a list of all the sort of solutions we could possibly have? I'm like, man, the last time we took a crack at that, you're talking about what are all the things that computers are useful for? That's a long list, man. But it turns out when you do that with machine learning, it's worse. Right? Like, what are all the things that people learn to do on a repeated basis? Like, oh my God, it's bottomless. It's totally bottomless. So there's a lot of places where I think the kind of open approach and the approach that has us all working together and collaborating to find best value instead of in this sort of like feisty, competitive mode all the time is a place where I'm really excited. We're going to do some fun stuff.
Heck yeah! I mean, and just the what you're describing is just providing challenges that I don't think many folks that run a business would even start to even think was fathomable for them to accomplish without huge investment of time and resources. And to be able to be like, wait, I just watched that demo and I think I could probably do that myself. That's a big shift in terms of trying to find answers to problems. That's remarkable stuff.
Yeah, another one that's fun we've been working on. We built this game called Cloud Hero, where you run people through and they build this whole big application on top of us in an hour and a half, and they race and they get prizes and stuff. But if you look at the thing sideways, what you end up building in this hour and a half, one is totally multi-cloud ready. Two is built on all open stuff. Three, we the last two people who won had never used GCP before. So, right, like ease of use is through the roof. And when you show companies that setup, I go, how long does it take you today to build up the platform for your applications and then the application itself, and then get that deployed into production and then do the A/B testing and the log analysis? And they go, that's months, man. It's years. What do you mean I'm like, I just did it with 5 of your employees in an hour and a half. Like, why are you wasting a bunch of time? So it's been fun watching people's perceptions of how long and how expensive all this stuff is kind of fall through the floor.
Oh, I love that's the stuff right there. That's fantastic. I love it. That's what this is all about. Miles, as always, it is a crazy pleasure to spend some time with you. I guess the last thing I'll ask is, do you have any gigs coming up?
Yeah, no, we just had our Seattle Summit, one of the Google events, and every year all these teams, they get bigger, and so you got a bunch of Nooglers and they don't know what's what, and they're like, Miles, do you think we could do something fun in Seattle? I said, sure. So we brought 30 of my friends with their marching band instruments and descended on the stage and made a bunch of dumb noises. And we took the head of sales and handed him like a little pocket trumpet. He played trumpet in high school, but I think it's been quite a while. And poor guy, like, we just sort of leave him on stage. So he's up there ready to do his keynote, kind of holding this trumpet, and there's no place to put it down. So he just kind of is like walking around gesticulating with this trumpet. Oh, it was fabulous. Fabulous.
Fantastic. Love it. That's great. Well, Miles, thank you so much. I do wish you well. And yeah, it's always a pleasure. And I think a lot of folks are going to get a lot of good thoughts in their brain space from this one. So thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, looking forward to the next one. Thanks, Jason.
You got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.